Do you think Zoom silences are more awkward than normal silences in a large room? Maybe. I'm just going to start. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure to be here with Chip Delany and Brontez Purnell. And just as a reminder, my name is Dina Beard. I'm the director of the lab, artistic director of the lab. The lab itself sits on stolen land. So it sits on the land stolen from the Ramaytush Ohlone people. And it sits inside of a city built by stolen labor and with stolen lives. So everything that we do in this space, we have to acknowledge that and our complicity within it. And that is a very, very important part of our project here. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the lab gives a few artists each year between $25,000 and $100,000 each. We give them keys to our space, the login for our website, and the option to revise any and all aspects of our operating model. With this, we really want to know how far we can go to inquire into an artist's practice and how we as a collective can bend to make the project of art possible on every level. And so during the pandemic, we were kind of stymied as far as the project itself, because the lab is about gathering and it's about assembling, about bringing people together and trying to realize art as a community. So without that possibility, we initiated these forums at the start of the pandemic to reconsider our knowledge across many different disciplines and creative practices. So these forums are meant to create space for generating ideas and actions, and they're not meant to just be stagnant artist talks of any sort. They're meant to be like live, thoughtful reconsiderations of how we live and breathe in the world. Of course, problematically, we have to do these on Zoom, which is an annoying medium to say the least, and very isolating, like so many of our platforms these days. So in order for this to work, we really need you, the audience, to participate. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can chat and say hello and talk amongst yourselves, but please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. And I'll read those aloud at the end of the talk, and Brontez and Chip can answer. And then also, if you find the lab's work inspiring in any way at all, we really need your help. Please consider donating, joining as a member, or just subscribing to our mailing list. Our project is risky, precarious, but ultimately it generates an extraordinary amount of joy. But it depends entirely on the complicity of the communities that we bring together. So thank you for supporting us. And way back in, I think it was 2015, Brontez, we commissioned you to do this insane project to create a documentary film that was also an archive on the work of the extraordinary dancer and choreography Ed Mock, who very, very sadly died of AIDS in 1986. Purnell said that Mock was the missing choreographic link between Alvin Ailey, Anna Halpern, and Bill T. Jones. And the documentary that you made ultimately became a kind of link to that history, and it was also kind of a love letter. It was a beautiful, beautiful testament to how one generation can live and support and amplify the voice of another generation. And I don't think there's any chance that Chip's work is going to be lost to history in any sense, but I do think I'm really inspired and excited to see the resonances between you two and how this kind of rapport that will be created tonight will kind of generate waves throughout your practices, each of your practices, and hopefully other practices of artists who are here tonight. So, of course, Samuel Chip Delany is the author of numerous radical and brilliant short stories, novels, and autobiography, and many, many, many critical essays. The essay we'll be talking about tonight is on Ophelia, the character in Hamlet, correct?
Basically, yeah.
Basically. So yeah, I love your critical work, your critical thinking and critical ideas alongside the speculative fiction, and the range and breadth of your practice is really awe-inspiring. So with that, I'm going to get lost. I'm going to give it over to you. And thank you both so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Oh my God. Hey Chip, how's it going?
Oh, as fine as it can be as in these more or less post-COVID days. No, it's going pretty well. And of course it's not post-COVID. It's we're still trying to just make sure we don't kill other people and other people don't kill us.
Yeah, I had to do that before COVID anyway.
Didn't we go? Yeah, I mean, I remember like in the first days of AIDS and things like that. It was a very similar kind of feeling, and yet differently. And yet this gets, because this everybody is equally vulnerable. It's a different kind of thing.
I mean, yeah, happy belated World AIDS Day.
And thank you. Yes, yeah, right.
So I was talking to my friend and said that me and you were gonna do a talk, and he made this really fucked up joke where he was just like, "Oh yeah, y'all just gonna talk about sucking dick in a park somewhere," and I was like, "No, actually we're gonna talk about Shakespeare." And
we could put a little park sucking dick in it too, just to spice it up, if we wanted to, if we're feeling generous.
There we go. Yeah, I was also at first I was stunted because I was just Shakespeare, fuck, I think I totally skipped all those days of advanced placement English or whatever, or I literally just remembered the cliff notes. But I was really interested in the way this was framed, kind of the tragedy of Ophelia, and just there is kind of this through line in Shakespeare's work, where the women's roles kind of always, I mean, really denote the times, of course.
Yeah.
The women of higher born social mobility were still possessions of husbands and fathers and all that different type of stuff. Women of lower born social mobility had a little more freedom in that they were deemed socially harmless, but ultimately, kind of the same fate. But what I'd actually like to start with is, where did you first encounter the story of Hamlet, and why did it make a mark on you?
It was in my senior year of high school, and I had what was called a college English course by a wonderful teacher named Dr. Isabel Gordon, who was one of the two PhDs in our high school. And at that point, if someone actually had a PhD, you call them doctor, and there was usually pretty good reason for it. And Dr. Gordon was a wonderful teacher. And one of the things it was called a college English course. And so we read Hamlet. And not only that, she made us read a fair amount of Hamlet criticism as well, in the section where we read Hamlet. And one of the most important books that she made us read was a book by a man named John Dover Wilson called What Happens in Hamlet. And he had written this book back in 1935, and it's still in print today. And and he talks about the text just so that you understand the plot of Hamlet. Among the many people who have not understood the plot of Hamlet is almost everyone who's ever made a film out of it. Kenneth Branagh, who has made some wonderful films, his film of Hamlet, as far as a representation of what happens in Hamlet, is really weird. But anyway, but one of the things that I noticed, and it was one of the first things I noticed, and I started that this began as a senior high school paper, was that Ophelia. Okay, let me see if I can say this in 3 quick sentences.
We don't have to be quick. We have plenty of time.
No, because then if I don't, we won't talk about anything else except this. Shakespeare's plays are usually divided up into 5 acts. Shakespeare did not divide his plays up into 5 acts himself. He simply had them as scenes. and the other people put them in this 5-act structure, which is a kind of classical structure. But when you look at them carefully, you notice that they seem to divide up into 5 acts, maybe not at quite the places he divides them, but they do divide them up into 5 acts pretty naturally. And the 4th act always, especially in the tragedies, fulfills a certain function. It's a time for the main characters to go off and sit outside and get their breath back and come back and have a final sword fight. Act is fair, and at the end, at the end of Hamlet, everybody is dead all over the stage. Everyone has killed each other. People have been nicked by poisoned swords. It's a real disaster, and everybody is dead. People have been made to drink poison and it's been forced down their throats, and it's well, okay. Well, the thing about what few people have noticed is that Ophelia herself has 5 entrances has 5 scenes in the play where she's on stage. And it's almost as though Ophelia's story is a tragedy within the tragedy. And it also goes in with this 5-act thing. And then the last thing is she's mad, and then she goes off stage and drowns, and the queen comes back and tells us that she's drowned. And so I just thought, well, let's just analyze Ophelia's part in this thing. One of the things I was always interested in, starting with my earliest times in school, was the political position of women. And I had a very good young woman friend whom I eventually married, and we followed this up, and a woman, she was a poet named Marilyn Hacker, and we were married for 13 odd years, and eventually had a child. I was gay. Eventually she turned gay practically just as she left me, which was an interesting thing. When I found out that that she had become gay, no one was more surprised than I. But fine, the stranger things like that, and so anyway. But so this is where the whole idea started. Jump a long time to the Kennedy assassination. From my high school, I graduated in and I graduated in the end of June of '60 from high school. And then and then the Kennedy assassination. And at that time I had started a very, very long non-science fiction novel called Voyage Orestes, of which the whole I worked on it for 5 years. It had nothing to do with science fiction, and eventually about 160 pages of it turned up and was published in this edition, just the what's left of Voyage Orestes. Here, that's the cover, and that's been published by a guy. In that, at one point, one of the main characters goes and is supposed to be giving a reading at Harvard. And he goes to give a reading. He is a gay poet, and he's supposed to be giving supposed to be giving a reading at Harvard, and his room, the room where he's supposed to be giving the reading, is locked. And so all these kids gather in the hall that have come there to hear him, and he can't get in to give his reading. So in the hall, he gives this extempore discussion of Ophelia and Shakespeare, which is basically a short version of this paper. I lost that. I completely lost that, but I kept the idea. So for its first appearance in typescript was an impromptu lecture given by a character in this lost novel of mine. But I always kept the ideas. I always had the ideas. So then one thing led to another. I thought, well, it's one of the things I'd like to do is just before before it's too late and I can't do anything, I would just like to write it all out. So I did. And then I joined it with this other essay I had written on Othello. Back in a production of Othello years ago, there was a woman named, her name was Cynthia Belgrave. Here is a picture of, can you see her?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can see her there. She had a small theater out in, Cynthia is the black woman. The other one is a drag queen named Ethel Eichelberger, who had a theater company, whom I also was there with. A woman, I was never a part of Ethel's theater, but I saw almost everything she did. And he was a wonderful, one of the great, he did die of AIDS, or she died of AIDS. I go back to the point where there was no pronoun confusion. That shows you how old I am. You refer to people by their birth sex usually. The notion that I'm perfectly happy to refer to anyone by whatever they are most comfortable for. But
just so you know, my pronouns are auntie.
Oh, there you go. Okay, all right. Yeah, I'm he. I'm basically the cisgendered gay guy, and I'm comfortable with he. And I get confused over anything else, but my heart's in the right place, I hope.
I think I'm from that generation where she was a gender neutral term.
It could be for
she. I don't know.
Yeah. And there was a time when, God knows people have referred to me as she, and I never took offense. I always assumed that it was okay. Be that as it may. So
we got Carol Queen and Phonique up in the comments. Hey,
is that Carol Queen?
Oh yeah, Carol, we love you.
Yes, we certainly do. Why, that goes for me too, Carol. Okay. Okay. And that is how I came to this. I thought, well, I still think it's a good idea. So let me do it before I die. Cynthia Belgrave had a small theater, which I was actually did perform in a couple of times. Basically, the theater was Cynthia Belgrave was CBA Theater, which was Cynthia Belgrave Associates, and she had a theater in her basement in Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn. And she did, among other things, she did a production of Jack or the Submission, in which I played Father Jack, in Nesco's play about. It's a theater of the absurd thing, and I played Father Jack, and my friend Barbara Wise played Mother Jack, and my friend John Del Gazo played another part, and what have you. And there are some photographs there of it. And we're getting off on a tangent, which is
let the tangent ride. We need to know.
Okay, but anyway, and she also did a production of Othello. Which is the other essay in the two essays that are in this book. And the other essay is a thing I wrote back just at the end of the last century on Othello. And between them, they are the two pieces of Shakespearean criticism I've done, and they're both in the same little book. Which the first version, the what do you call it? The layout was completely screwed up, and so it's just been corrected so that you can now get it. Sadly, spit, curse on the big A. But maybe if you do it quickly, while Jeff is coming down from his trip to outer space, he may not notice that you bought it. So I don't know.
So let me ask you this. So basically it started as a paper you wrote in like
high school, in my senior year of high school. Yeah, my senior year in high school for Dr. Isabel Gordon. and then became a chapter in this novel, Voyage Orestes. The text of the novel and the original paper were lost, but I thought the ideas are still good, so let's write it out and see what we can do with it.
But it was completed sometime in the 90s.
The original was completed sometime. Oh no, the original was completed probably sometime in 59 or 60 in my senior year of high school at the Bronx High School of Science.
When? Okay, just the part about Hamlet, but then the joining essay of Ophelia.
Yes, that was done. That was done around 90. That was done around 95, 94, 95. I would have to run and pull out books, out the actual date of it.
I really, really love pieces of work that just like span like a whole fucking like arc of time. Something about this book feels like your Sistine Chapel piece, you know? Like,
it's got lots of really pretty illustrations. It's all illustrations, and it's got a picture of Ethel Eichelberger, which I think is worth the in drag, who used to do a one man production that he would accompany himself on the accordion of King Lear, in which he would play all the parts. Goneril, Regan, Cordelia, Kent, all the people, Gloucester, the Tom of Bedlam, the Fool, and he would do all of King Lear in one evening, and it was, you came out of it with your while he played the accordion. This 6'3" drag queen doing all
that sounds amazing and really
it was
stressful.
Yes, and he also had another play that I dearly love, and which is probably one of the reasons I wanted to dedicate something to his memory, called Ruth. And one of the people in his company was another actor named Ernesto, and they played two characters named Ruth, who constantly shadowed each other's. Their lines were identical, just one after another, and they went all through. And Ruth, who was like, oh, Ruth, and it was a wonderful piece of theater. Ethel died of AIDS. And in fact committed suicide when he had AIDS. And I just thought, and it was a lot, as Cynthia died natural causes and ran her own theater, and Ethel had his own theater company too. And my friend Barbara Wise was also in Ethel's theater company. And she played in Ruth, she played a little part called Lammy Pie. She was the only woman in this otherwise this collection of all drag queens who were basically the Ethel Eichelberg company. And she was quite wonderful too. And she played Mother Jack in the production of Jack. There's our picture is also in there. Anyway. So now that you had more than you could possibly want to know about the context of all of this.
Well, okay. Well, that's essentially what I was going to ask. What exactly, I guess, what were the things, why was this book ended in 94? Or like, what were the things that led up to you being like, okay, I want to take this from high school and like fuse it with the other part of this theory, and it's time for this to like live on in its own kind of.
Well, because I thought it was a good, there are good ideas, and there are, there are ideas that somebody will have again, and there are ideas that maybe nobody will ever have again. This particular reading of Ophelia, which solves a problem that J. Dover Wilson and What Happens in Hamlet raised for the first time. He figured there's got to be a missing entrance in the text of Hamlet, because otherwise the text doesn't make sense. Because in the act 3, scene 2, the Get Thee to a Nunnery speech, nymphs and orisons, be all my sins remembered, and and Hamlet asks her, "Where is your father?" And lying through her teeth, she says, "At home, my lord," and he knows she's lying. Now, J. Dover Wilson says he's got to come on, see her and see Polonius and Claudius talking, realize, sneak back out again, and realize, and that explains why he knows it. I figure you can do it with just the acting, which is the reading I give it. Since the one thing, the only problem with J. Dover Wilson's suggestion is there is no place you can find any indication that there was this false entrance. It's not in the text. It's just not in the text. Clearly, Hamlet learned something between the beginning of that scene and the end of that scene. And the question is, how does he learn it? And I suggest that it comes from the way Ophelia actually plays her part. And the one thing to remember, the main thing you've got to remember about, we know the name of some of the male actors in Shakespeare's company. Richard Burbage, who played Hamlet, the first Hamlet. Othello was also done in the same time, in the same theater, in the same playhouse. And I have a picture of the playhouse in the beginning so that you can envision where all this was being done, and all that's part of among the illustrations so that you make it easier to envision. But there must have been some fabulous actresses, and the actresses, as we know in Shakespeare's part, were all men. They were all. That's basically it was where the theater was. Half of Shakespeare's parts for women are amazing. Juliet, the nurse, Lady Macbeth, Volumnia in Coriolanus. There are plays like King Lear where Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia, and Twelfth Night. And there are many. One of the things that Shakespeare does constantly is have women in his plays dress up as men. So you've got this double thing. You've got a male actor playing a woman who is trying to be mistaken as a man, and the audience is eating it up. And they're serious plays as well. So you have to. We don't have the names of any of the specifically female actors, but women didn't come on the stage for another 200 years until Dryden. Until Dryden started writing plays, and you have 200 years of all female parts being taken by men. And the theater, one of the reasons why the theater was considered such an immoral place at the time. There's a legend about Shakespeare that he held horses. There's no proof of it, but he held horses. In medieval time, there was one profession that, in the way that male hairdressers are associated with gay men for a long, long time, there was one profession that was associated with hustling. I'll give you one guess who the hustlers all were. They were the people who held horses outside of theaters, bars, what have you. You could always get one of these guys who was holding your horse. You want to hold something else. That's how that worked. And it went. And which was a way of saying that Shakespeare probably started. Then this all got lost. And you find it you find references to it in like the biography of Beatrice, the trial of Beatrice Cenci in the 16th century, when Beatrice's father is convicted of sodomy, and he was convicted of sodomy, and the judge's pronouncement was. The people he was convicted of sodomy with were the grooms in his own stable. And the judge's pronouncement of he was doing with grown men what is only acceptable to do with boys.
I'm dead. Oh
And it was the grooms, of course. And this is the same, and this is why Shakespeare was said to hold horses outside the Globe Theater. You know, he may not have, but it was a way of saying, well, his background was a little iffy. We also know that he was married and had twin, and he left Anne Hathaway, with whom he married and had 3 children, one of whom was named Hamlet, and one of whom was named Judas, and those were actually, but when he was 19 or so, in 18 or 19, he ran away to London and stayed in London. I have a wonderful book that is called Chasing Shakespeare. It's by a woman named Sarah Smith, who comes up with who tackles the question: was it Shakespeare? Was it the Earl of? Was it the other person who has oh, come on. I will have to look, and it's not that far away. This is the book. This is the book. But and she says this is all nonsense. She says this is all not, but it's one of the best. For nonsense, it works very well, very, very well. And let me. Anyway, so there you go. But there's a lot of this stuff around, and this is the kind of stuff that gets lost with time. Yeah, Edward de Vere. Someone says it's Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford. Yeah, that John, my friend John Keane has just supplied that off stage, in the chat link. Yeah, Earl of Oxford. Yes, exactly.
I think I have time for one more question before the crowd question starts. But this was the thing that I kind of always wanted to nail in. What exactly is significant about Ophelia's 5 entrances?
Well, I think that there's a tendency to let Ophelia be just a dear sweet thing whose father gets killed and she goes crazy. That's the usual. I think it's her father. She must lie to Hamlet. Hamlet kills her father, and in an attempt to save Hamlet's life from getting killed by Claudius, that the pressure is too much for her, and she goes crazy. Which is which requires a really good actress to do. Ophelia ceases to be just a dear sweet thing who loses her mind. She becomes a much more active and more touched by the agency of what will become an agent in the whole process. Who is much again, there's a lot of reference to criticism, everything from Harley Granville Barker, who has a wonderful thing where he has a book called The Trembling Private Body, where he talks about what was available to Elizabethan audiences, to what were the cliches of the time. And one of the things was that emotions themselves had not gone through either Ibsen or Freud.
Right.
But so this is all pre-Ibsen, it's all pre-Freud, which makes, try that much more brilliant. But one of the things he says, this notion of this notion that we could, that you ask, somebody says, I think I love you, but I'm not sure. That can't happen on an Elizabethan stage, People are never unsure of their emotions. And one of the things about Hamlet is simply that it's about somebody pretending to be mad. Hamlet pretends to be mad, you know, and the irony is Hamlet is pretending to be mad, and Ophelia by the end of it is mad. And that's part of the irony of the thing, is that he's pretending, and while he's pretending, she loses her mind. And she loses her mind under pressure, you know, and you've got to show what the pressure is that makes her snap. You know, that's you know, in a nutshell, that's what this whole reading, that's what my whole reading is about.
And her death was even rather grandiose, right? She's sitting in a tree and the branch snaps. Is that what happened?
No. She wanders into the water. She wanders into the river, and she lies on her back, and the water soaks her, and she's singing. And as she's washed down the stream, her clothes get soaked, and she's pulled under the water, and she drowns. That's how she actually.
Oh.
No, she does not kill her. She doesn't die on stage. She dies off stage. And there's a very famous painting which I use at the end of the by a wonderful 22-year-old artist. This is the death of Ophelia. This is of Edward Everett Millais, and this is Ophelia floating down the stream, you know, moments before she drowns. You know, and this is recounted by the Queen. Hears this from one of her guards who saw it happen and recounts it to the audience. The Queen explains how Ophelia drowns and what have you, and how she ends. And it also goes through her whole mad scene. She has a scene where she comes in and she's really stark raving loony. You know, Hamlet's been pretending to be mad and saying all sorts of funny things to let you know he's only pretending. You know. But Ophelia, but Ophelia is really mad, and we have her whole mad scene, and then she wanders out, and the next thing you know, she's dead.
I think there was something really interesting in the play that you said about like how madness would even be portrayed on stage, yes, as opposed to what our knowledge of like madness is.
Yeah, but madness is something you can pretend to be mad, but the thing that ruins so many modern productions of Shakespeare is you can't be a little bit pretending and a little bit real. You either have to be sane and pretending to be mad, or you have to be really mad. But you can't be halfway between. And so this is why some of, like the Zeffirelli film, which has Helen Bonham Carter as a wonderful Ophelia, but his action adventure Hamlet just doesn't work at all.
Nah.
Because he's sort of half mad and half sane, and that's just silly. You know.
Is there any like particular favorite you have
of the films?
Of the films, yeah.
No, the reason I wrote this is maybe somebody will read it and decided he's right and do a film or a play in which they use this as their basic what's the word I want? As their basic template for directing both Hamlet and Ophelia, and I think they'll have a really excellent production of Hamlet. Yeah.
Radical. So it's 5:45. I think we can maybe take a few questions.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Would you like me to read them?
Wait, what, dear?
Would you like me to read them aloud?
Please.
To be the orator. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Total joy. I know the time goes so quickly.
I know.
So the first question is fantastic from Carol Queen. She asks, so my question harkens back to a long conversation I had with Chip 25 years ago about people writing in different gender orientation voice than their own. Fast forward, recently there was a big think piece in the Atlantic about the possibility that Shakespeare was actually a woman. Do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah. Um, um, I there's always the possibility that that's like Samuel Butler's, very seriously argued thing that the author of the Odyssey was really a woman. That the Iliad is a play an epic poem by a man, and then in fact he has a book called The Authoress of the Odyssey, and it's fascinating, and it's a very good, and it's full of Greek philology and mistakes that you find in the play about descriptions of boats, and that's more likely to be made by a woman and things like that. I think at the time, it's pretty. I don't think women had that much freedom. I think the best you did is Shakespeare may well have been gay as a plaid rabbit. I suspect he was, if only because he was in the theater. And because the theater itself was a profession in which, four-fifths of, half the people there were playing the parts of transsexuals. We're clearly must have had a leaning towards transgenderism, because they were people who enjoyed, who were perhaps very comfortable getting on stage dressed as women and playing women's parts, sometimes highly impassioned, often dramatically much more complex than many of the male parts. They really were. I mean, and that's I think one of the reasons it was done, so that that's I think the way it worked. So did I miss the question in there somewhere?
No, I think it was really well responded to. I think the the real thing for the audience that's here today is none of us are going to be able to think of holding my horses in the same. I use that phrase all the time too. So Steen asks, I'm curious if either of you are familiar with the Gerhard Rühm, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Rühm radio play Ophelia and the Words. It is Hamlet reduced to only Ophelia's lines and background sound effects, done in an increasingly...
It sounds wonderful. I missed it.
Oh, interesting. I think he's talking about it is done in an increasingly incoherent way to mirror her descent into madness. I heard it when I was very young, and it has struck me for years. But if neither of you has seen it, then or heard it, then we will move on. Robert Barrett asks, why do you think the image of the drowned Ophelia has become such an archetypal image?
Partially because of the Malay painting that I just showed up. I mean, I am always astonished when I remember that the guy who painted that was 22 years old. But it's a kind of what's the word? I can't even remember the Rossettis and all. What do they call it? There's a whole artistic movement that I'm blocking the title out of. But pre-Raphaelite, someone said. Yeah, it's the whole pre-Raphaelite movement. And this pre-Raphaelite moment just before she drowns. It's a great painting. That's why. Yeah, thank you. John has also chimed in on that. I'm losing my short-term memory, and if I don't have it written down in front of me at this point, I don't trust myself with anything anymore. This is what happens when you get 80.
I've done a lot of Molly, and so
yes,
mine was gone 3 years ago. I'm like, I forgot why I walked in this room. The first thing I was like, oh, I'm doing a talk.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it happens to us all.
Well, I have no excuse, so. Chris Carson asks, I think Pasternak talks about the shifts from false speech to authentic speech in Romeo and Juliet, and how the poetry of Romeo's language shifts when he meets Juliet. What have you noticed about the differences in the poetry between Hamlet's fake crazy and Ophelia's real crazy?
I have not noticed anything that I can put my finger on right now, or at least not that I can remember. When she first loses her mind, her oh, what a noble mind is here o'erthrown, when she's talking about Hamlet's being crazy, and she's trying to convince, I think, her father that Hamlet really is crazy, and she knows that he's not. She knows that he's just upset because she had to lie to him, and I think the upset is because he did not realize that Claudius was also behind the arras, and if she had given it away, Claudius that he did know what was going on, Hamlet would have been dead the next day. She's trying to save his life by lying. And then she's trying to convince Claudius and her father that Hamlet really is crazy, and she knows he's not, and the strain is too much for her. And that's when she begins to lose her own mind. And a moment later, Hamlet will run off and kill her father behind the arras. Will run off with a sword through her father, who is the most important man in her life.
Yeah, that's a good argument. I don't know if I'm saying this right. Hibernacula asks, what was the process of getting Hog published? What were your thoughts creating and making it?
Well, that is an entire section. That's an entire different program. There is a book that I recently just done there, which has that you can see this. This is a book it's a book on Dhalgren, and it also has a statement, a piece at the making of Hog. What happened, which was written simultaneously with Dhalgren. The two were written they began together and they were concluded together. And they both were mostly written in San Francisco. They were both finished in London, in the same years. And then Hogg, of course, had to wait 25 years to be published, whereas Dhalgren was released pretty soon after it was completed. But Hogg was a little bit too much for people at the time.
Marvelous. Well, this is a question for both of you from an anonymous attendee. And clearly we've seen it in Chips a little bit, but they ask, are there any pieces of work that you have that have found their way into later things?
It sounds like you were talking about the process that Raymond Chandler called cannibalization, where you use something earlier. Yeah, I did that. I wrote 9 science fiction novels, 9 ordinary novels before I even started writing science fiction. Yeah, and I used sections from some of them in The Fall of the Towers. I cannibalized them, for things there. And yeah, you do that. That pretty much after that, I more or less stopped, and things were written basically for themselves. Yeah, one does that. I have a couple of torsos of projects that never got done, as I said, and unfortunately, the book that I put in most of 5 full years' work on, Voyage Orestes, the 90% of the manuscript was completely lost. And it came very close on a couple of occasions to being published. And somebody once who had been a junior editor at a place that had rejected it, and he'd read it and wanted it, and he became a senior editor somewhere else and called me up and said, hey, I've now got some clout at the place. I would like to see this book again, because now I can, when everybody else was saying we couldn't possibly publish it, I really wanted to publish it. Can you show it to me? And by that time, the manuscript had been destroyed. That's the kind of thing that makes you cry. And I did at the time it happened. And a friend of mine was very helpful, and a guy named Steve Greenbaum, and was very, a good soul when all that was happening. But I've gotten used to the fact that it's gone and there's no way to get it back.
That is a huge loss. What about for you, Brontez? Is there anything that's...
I started writing my first science fiction novel during quarantine, and I somehow, again, Molly, I ended up losing like fucking 7 chapters of it. And so I've spent from July of last year till now trying to reconstruct what I thought it looked like. But I was kind of just like heartbroken because I was on fire. Like I was like, damn, this is some good shit. And then it was gone.
It got lost?
Yeah, like on my computer. And it's also too, it's like, so there's no reason to lose things these days. All I had to do was put it in Google Drive, but I'm like, no, I'm just going to keep it on my desktop. It has to be authentic, like coming from my fingers. Like I'm not going to save it until it's ready. Like,
and the push of the wrong button. Yeah.
It just disappeared.
I hug you virtually.
Thank
That's
you.
the kind of, having been there myself, I really, I know how that can sting.
If I really was just working on a typewriter, it probably would just be somewhere, but I'm just kind of like, I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
No, but then it gets lost in a fire, right? That's what happened to yours, Chip, right? Was it a fire?
What? No.
Your manuscript?
No, as a matter of fact, it was in a wooden filing it was in a wooden file cabinet, which is the first piece of furniture that my wife and I got when we got married. It went with us to a new apartment. I left it there. The woman, Mrs. Jareba, who was my superintendent at the time, she realized that it was important. They couldn't get the whole thing, so they took the filing cabinet drawers and put them in the basement, waiting for me to come by. Somebody bought the building. They bulldozed the building. The whole building was buried. There's a gaping lot. And when I went in, she said, she was now living in the building next door. And she said, if you had come 4 months before, you'd have them. What you do.
That is so much more dramatic than a fire.
No, if you go on my timeline and you look in the pictures, you can see a picture of the vacant lot underneath which, probably about a story down, there is the destroyed manuscripts of Samuel Delany, but somebody would have to dig it out, and I'm sure it's it happens when a bulldozer bulldozes up a vacant lot, a lot like that.
Oh my gosh, I'm trying to find one.
Somebody say yes, Mr. Steen, or Mr. Mrs. Steen, wherever you are. Yeah. You can see a picture of the lot on my timeline in my website. I had enough feeling for it, so that I actually put a picture of the place where we used to live. None of the places where I lived as a kid are untouched. Mm. Even the house that I lived in Harlem has had 2 stories added to it, and is now it used to be a 3-story private house, and now it's a 5-story apartment house.
Wow,
crazy. Here's one from John Keene. He asks, I have always wanted to ask Chip, one of your most sublime works is Through the Valley of the Nest of Spiders. Might you talk about how it came to be? For Brontez, I see resonances with your 100 boyfriends. Would you say a few words about its birth and the resonances you see with Chip's work?
Okay, why don't you go first, Brontez? I've been hogging the thing.
Um, 100 Boyfriends. Uh, every time I say 100 Boyfriends, I have to think about the whole back history and all that. It's immediately kind of a little bit of exhausting or whatever. But I will say, the way I got introduced to your work was I was 22 and I was having sex with this older married dude, and like his wife was really into him having like younger boyfriends. And I used to go to his house and we would bone on his weight bench in the basement while his wife was like cooking. And then I remember leaving one day and he was like, I have something that you might like. Cause I had the zine Fag School that had sex stories in it. And he gave me a copy of Hog when I was like 22. And I
The
remember
co-book of Dhalgren. Yeah, the dark underside of Dhalgren.
yeah, like
in Dhalgren.
yeah, and I remember reading it and being like, yo, this shit is like crazy. Cause I still think I was like, I mean, I wrote about sex, but I was just like, I like boys, I suck dick, but I was like, oh, like this is a fucking thing right here. But yeah, I don't know. I think it was really kind of important for me to read that at that time, as I was discovering lots of other literary things, like, first coming to the Bay Area and getting kind of a crash course in just, all types of literature. But particularly, I think it was the first time I read kind of another transgressive, like Black male voice of that caliber. I remember that having always like kind of like this like real galvanizing effect. So yeah, I do consider it as something that shaped me. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. The quick story of Through the Valley of the Nest of Spiders is there was an interview with Vladimir Nabokov in Playboy right after Lolita was published, and people were talking about how transgressive it was, and Nabokov said, "There's nothing transgressive about Lolita. It's just it's just about a guy who likes 14-year-old girls, or 12-year-old girls, as the case may be. And at the end of Lolita, she's 17 and dies in childbirth, which is, how. But anyway, but Nabokov went on to say, if you want to write the really shocking, he said, imagine a novel in which about an interracial couple. They go and they get married. They and their children have no encounters with drugs or the law. They grow up to lead a happy life, and at the end they die a ripe old age, surrounded by their children and their grandchildren," said Nabokov back in the late '60s. And he said, now that would be the really shocking novel. So I decided.
Damn right.
Yeah. So I said, I think I'm going to try to do this, but I'm going to do it a little differently. I'm going to make it an interracial relationship, but it's just going to be an interracial relationship with a man, two men. And they're not going, who stay together, who get together, in this case, at 17 and 19. They have an open relationship, and they stay together for the rest of their lives. They have things. They don't have children, but they kind of adopt people. They adopt a whole community, actually, and this is what and by that time I had a fairly long-term, my first sane long-term relationship with the guy I'm with now, Dennis, who's in the other room as we talk. And I now know something a little bit more about long-term relationships. I used to say, and that the ideal relationship.
You called me sane.
Yes, I am. Yes, Dennis Seth came in and just said, "You called me sane."
He called me sane. He called me sane.
Yeah.
You don't know me very well.
Yes, I do. I guess not.
Only 31 years.
Yes, we've been together 31 years. But I see what is the ideal? We've always had an open relationship. I don't, I used to say my ideal relationship was, it was one person that I really liked, a few fuck buddies which is the term one uses, and what have you, and then a good, healthy masturbatory life, and sometimes you have all of them, and sometimes you have two of them, and sometimes you have one of them, and I'm now at the point where basically I've got two out of the three, and I'm very pleased with it, and the big guy is still there, and I'm pleased. So I feel very lucky, at this point. But that's what I wanted to deal with in Through the Valley of the Nest of Spiders. What it requires to make a long-term relation work, and it's about these two guys who meet, and they together and apart they are for the rest of their lives. And people have been very, very supportive. Those people who are very. It took a long time for me to decide I want to write another big novel, and it's longer than Dhalgren. It's another novel that's longer than Dhalgren, and it takes it's basically about a lifetime.
That's beautiful. I really do want to hear this somehow have Brontez, Paul Atla was asking if Brontez could adapt Chips the Madmen into a feature film, but now I kind of want to do the side-by-side Dhalgren Hogg version, what it was like to co-author that in San Francisco, especially.
Yeah, Hogg, the first draft of Hogg was completed just before the Stonewall riots. And one of the things that was going on, it was in 5 notebooks, and I left it in San Francisco, went back to New York, came back, and the guy who was living in my apartment, a wonderful guy named Paul Caruso, said, by the way, you left these notebooks there, and I discovered I had the first draft of a whole novel, and that was Hogg. I don't think after the Stonewall riots, I don't think I could have written Hogg. And I said, which is to say, no, nobody had come, Stonewall made the country turn the country's interest on gay things, and made coming out a political thing, and the meaning of coming out changed itself entirely. There is a book called Boys Like Us, edited by Patrick Merla, which I have the introduction in, and it simply my introduction simply talks about the meaning of coming out, the changes in the meaning of coming out. Before Stonewall, coming out was something that was aimed at the gay community. You came out to the gay community. After Stonewall, you had to come out to the straight community, which is an entirely different thing, and that's a very different change, a different situation. So there you go.
Amazing, thank you. I definitely want to see that. The Brontez adaptation of the the Hogg Dhalgren.
It's coming.
Yeah.
So Ron asked a good final question too, that I think, it's about 6:10 here. I think we'll ask one more, and if Brontez, you want to kind of conclude with any thoughts, feel free. But Ron asks, will both of you please talk about the authentic drive, a refusal to edit or self-censor, and how it relates to your work, especially with Hogg and 100 Boyfriends?
A refusal to self-censor?
Self-censor. Censorship. Yeah.
I'm a very private, believe it or not, I'm a very private person. There's lots of stuff I don't want to talk about, and don't. Not lots, there's some.
A lot of what seems wild in my writing is actually really carefully crafted. I feel like I censor myself all the time, or I'm always, when I write something, I think just being in the theater tradition, I always have to be able to recite it as a monologue in my head before I commit it to the page. And it's, a lot of people think that I talk to myself. Which I do, but that's mostly what I'm doing. I'm preparing what this looks like. So yeah, I think that is a form of censorship. And so I don't know if I could claim total lack of self-censorship or whatever. I'll say it like Dolly Parton said it. It takes a lot of money to look this cheap.
Yeah, but one of my favorite lines. Takes a lot. I mean, I remember when I first heard that, I fell off the chair.
We need only look to Dolly ever.
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. And I will always love you. Yes.
I will always love you.
Yeah. Yeah.
With that, do you have any concluding thoughts, Brontez, or any final question?
No, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. And
thank you for putting up with the old man's ramblings.
No, I love it. I'm like, we got to talk about Shakespeare. It's about fucking time I classed it up. So,
yeah, it was
beautiful.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for the questions, and thank you for the attention. Intelligent attention is the biggest gift I think you can give any writer. And I think when you do it, one feels very honored.
Well, the best, two of the best sitting here. And Chip, like I said, there's no way your work will be lost to history, even if there is one manuscript sitting underneath the foundation. But thank you both so much. It's been an honor and a pleasure. And thank you all, everyone who joined and participated. We really, really appreciate you.